Massive balance changes have happened in Marvel Snap, and this is my first meta report of the season. What are the best decks? What are the best ways of playing Shuri and Thanos now that things have been nerfed? Well, this video should answer all your questions. Make sure you give it a like and subscribe for updated meta reports. In a few days, I'll have another one once things start to settle. So I've got some tiers, very loose. Bear in mind, it's super early days. These are really predictions. I have played a few hours, though, to get a feeling of the new decks. I think the best deck in the game is going to be Shuri. Shuri did get nerfed indirectly with Red Skull, now 13 points. Also Taskmaster. If your Red Skull gets Shang-Chi'd and then you try and copy your Red Skull, it's going to say no target available. Previously, it would still copy it, so that's a big nerf. Red Skull nerf, not quite as important just because of how many points you get with Shuri. I think this deck's really good. I also think the nerf to Aero has helped this deck. I think the Aero nerf is the one that's going to have the biggest impact on the meta across the board. Of course, Thanos nerf is huge for that one particular deck, but I think Aero has probably been keeping a lot of things in check. And I think, for example, She-Hulk and Taskmaster being one example. She-Hulk did get a point nerf. However, the change to Aero probably means this card is better than ever before, because you can play She-Hulk on turn 6 for 18 points if you Shuried on turn 4. You can play your Taskmaster for 18 points as well, and the Aero is then only going to be moving the Taskmaster into its lane. So much more difficult to deal with, this She-Hulk Taskmaster play. Captain Marvel could be swapped for Vision, I think, in this one as well. There's going to be quite a few Storms, so I think you probably do want to be including these cards. I think this deck's going to be really hard to beat, and the nerfs just don't seem like a big deal. I really think Shuri is just not a healthy card and needs to get nerfed in the future, but we'll see how this one plays out. Up next, we have Thanos. I think Thanos is still going to be right up there as one of the best decks in the game. Could even still prove to be the best deck in the game. The key change for this one, of course, is Quinjet is no longer reducing the cards, the stones to 0, so Quinjet's not going to make the deck anymore. Thanos lost a point, and the other big change is Space Stone. Now, on reveal, next turn you can move one card to this location and draw a card. So instead of playing the Space Stone into Lockjaw and then moving a card afterwards, you're going to play the Space Stone away from Lockjaw, and then you can move one of your Lockjawed cards into the Space Stone lane to free up an extra spot. So there's still synergy there with Lockjaw, but instead of having, for example, a 12-point Magneto on the board, which you could have rolled with Space Stone into Lockjaw, you're going to have a 1-point Space Stone every time. So definitely a nerf. Interestingly as well, and I do think significantly, Space Stone much worse against Storm. Storm has gone out of the meta quite a bit recently, and a big reason for that is the Space Stone. Space Stone being able to sneak cards into that Storm lane really easily. It can't do that anymore, so I think that's really good. So I think Storm can definitely make a bit of a comeback. Storm also good into Shuri decks because they play Shuri on turn 4. So I think Storm decks can make a comeback, but that's also why I would expect Captain Marvel and Vision to be good in these ones. So the Thanos deck is looking the exact same. The one difference I've made is I put armor in instead of the Quinjet. You could also put Kang in here if you do own it. The reason I've gone for armor is that suddenly your stones, I think, are a lot more important to stick on the board, because if your stones get killmongered, you've actually spent a lot of energy getting those down. So armor just makes a lot of sense. Also, Shang-Chi's still going to be very popular, and protecting your things should be pretty good. So I think armor makes a lot of sense, and I still expect this to be so good because Leech is covering all your weaknesses. Aero I've kept in the deck as well because Aero is 8 points, solid off Lockjaw. It's a good card into Galactus, which I think is going to be making quite a big comeback with the fact that Aero got nerfed. I still think the card's good. Like 8 stats for 5 is a really big deal, and it is going to help you keep a lot of decks in check. How good is this deck? I think it's probably worse than Shuri, but probably the second best deck in the game is my gut feeling. I don't think they've nerfed it enough, just because of Leech mainly. Leech just covers all your weaknesses, but we will see. We will see. Up next, we have Electro. Again, I put this in tier 1, but bear in mind, very loose. A big reason I think Electro is going to be a lot better, it's probably going to have a rough matchup into Shuri. It always has. Sandman not doing too much there. Maybe the Shang-Chi could help you out. The Aero with Odin is now something quite unique to this deck as well. You can go Sandman on turn 4, Aero on 5, Odin on 6 to really lock down your opponent, because they can only play one card per turn. Aero in Sandman decks just got a lot better than it is in other decks, that's for sure. So I think this one could be really very good. I do. Also, it had a bad matchup into Thanos before, But now with the fact that their stones are actually costing them energy, perhaps if you can get Sandman down on turn 4, you might have a chance against Thanos decks as well. Remains to be seen. Up next we have Serra Control, which I've also put into tier 1. I think this is just a strong deck. A big issue this deck had previously was it really struggled against Leech. Leech completely shut this down, and there's certainly going to be less Thanos decks. Also, with the fact that they don't have Quinjet making their stones so cheap, Killmonger should be more impactful in that matchup. So this should be a pretty solid deck. I still think it's going to struggle into Thanos because of the Leech, but you should be able to deal with a lot of decks. The main thing that you might want to consider putting in this list is Aero. Aero might help you deal with the Shuri decks. You might struggle without because of Cosmo. Your Shang-Chi just might not be doing enough. I put Wolfsbane in there, but you could definitely put Aero in there instead of Wolfsbane. One main consideration. Next, I've gone for tier 1.5, and this is Jeff Hoogland's bounce deck, which I've been so impressed with. The reason that I didn't want to quite put this in tier 1 is I do think it's a very good deck, but I do think it might be a bit of a Shuri-dominated meta, and I severely doubt that this deck is able to beat Shuri because you don't have Shang-Chi. I think Shuri's just going to be putting out way too many points, but perhaps I'm wrong. Like, I guess Iceman hitting Shuri could be pretty impactful. But yeah. Up next, also in tier 1.5 is Galactus. Galactus, I'm not sure how this one is going to play out. There's a whole bunch of different ways you guys can play Galactus. I still don't own the card, but this is the one I went for. Pretty much very standard. You might want to play Wave instead of Psylocke. It should be good. There should be less Aeros. One thing that's really worth considering with Galactus decks moving forwards is playing Wasp and Yellow Jacket in these decks. Because Aero is pulling the last card you played, you could play Galactus and Wasp, for example. Your opponent's then going to Aero you away, and your Galactus is actually going to go through, and it's just going to be your Wasp which gets pulled away. So we might see some interesting changes to Galactus decks with the addition of Wasp and with the addition of Yellow Jacket. Okay, moving on to the decks that I think are more tier 2 now. We have Patriot. This is Jeff Hoogland's list. I made one change. I put Misty Knight in instead of Shocker. This is a very solid deck. I played some similar lists myself. You might want to try Onslaught as well. If you didn't see my video I posted a few days ago. If you don't have Valkyrie you can, or Bast, you can play this with Onslaught and without those guys. It's a really nice deck. Debris is very good into Galactus. It seems like one of the biggest Galactus counters right now, especially if they start playing Wasp, like I just mentioned. Not many people play Enchantress. It's pretty good against Storm, somewhat, because you can get Squirrel Girl and all these things in there. Iron Man, very powerful. This should just be a solid deck. Up next, we have Silver Surfer. I played a fair bit of Silver Surfer just now. I was quite impressed. This is my favorite build of Silver Surfer. I actually think that you could make a strong argument to cut Sarah for another 2-drop. Or Chavez. I actually don't like Sarah that much in Silver Surfer decks, but I knew if I didn't include her, people would be reeing me. You might be wondering why on earth there's a Kingpin. Controversial, I know, but actually Juggernaut Kingpin is a combo I really do love. You can play Storm on 3, Kingpin on 4 if you're not expecting a big play. For example, against Shuri, Kingpin is going to be really, really important if they have that Vision or Captain Marvel. And then on turn 6, you can Juggernaut cards into the Storm and Kingpin lane, and you can play Silver Surfer to secure the Storm lane. Juggernaut's going to hopefully secure the lane you play it in. I think it's just a really nice deck. Goose, very underrated. Storm, now that Thanos is not so popular, is good, really good. Of course, one problem Goose has is She-Hulk. She can still sneak in there, so do bear that in mind. But this should be a pretty solid deck. I expect it to make a bit of a comeback. Quite good into Shuri decks as well, even without the Shang-Chi. Polaris also could be replaced for Debris. Polaris and Debris both quite good against Galactus. So is Goose and so is Storm. Okay, up next we have Draxu. I've never played this deck, but I've seen it doing the rounds. I wouldn't recommend playing this one. I'm not a big believer in it, but I did want to mention it. It was kind of the last deck I added in here because I have seen it doing the rounds recently. The Red Skull nerf does interest me, actually, as just playing this card now as a value card, because even if your opponent has 4 cards in the opposite row, it's still 9 points. So Red Skull looks pretty solid, and this deck could be decent. Never played it, but I wanted to mention it. Up next, Nimrod. This is the deck I got to Infinite this season. I could easily see this being higher than Tier 2, but it's not been tested by anyone apart from myself, so I just put it in Tier 2. I really love this deck. I got it to Infinite, and I posted a video on it if you want to check it out. Nothing really much more to say. Storm's amazing right now. It's got big points. The Kang skill check is good to see if your opponent has the Shang-Chi. If there's less Aeros, your Arnim Zola becomes more of a threat as well. Has loads of win cons. Storm, I think, is going to be really good into Shuri decks. So this can definitely beat Shuri, I would imagine. Okay, up next we have a discard deck. Not one I've tested, but definitely going to be playing around with this in the next couple days. And it's with Storm. Again, I think Storm is going to be a really amazing card for a lot of decks. Storm, I enjoy playing with Chavez because you get to play her on turn 3 more often. And Chavez makes a lot of sense with Dracula. Dracula's a really good card to win the Storm lane. Morbius is a really good card to win the Storm lane. I actually thought that I had Lockjaw in this deck, so I would maybe consider replacing Swordmaster or Blade for Lockjaw. I will update that in the description because I did want to run Lockjaw in this. You don't have to. This list is also fine, but I think Lockjaw could definitely slot in here instead of Blade or Swordmaster. 2 more decks to go. Just a normal Lockjaw deck here. I've kept Aero in this one as well. We have Dracula and Jubilee. You might want to experiment with Chavez in this one. Chavez, a little bit dodgy with Thor at times. So, yeah, this list looks pretty solid. Red Skull, I also just wanted to put in here as an idea because it is now, as I mentioned, a little bit better. But maybe you just want Chavez. Aero, I think, still just about makes the cut. It's a standard Lockjaw list. Maybe Sunspot shouldn't be in there, but yeah. And finally, Tier 3 Deadpool. I had to give it a mention because this deck just got shut down so hard by Aero before, but now I think it actually might be okay. I could see it being a solid Tier 2 deck, but yeah, I just wanted to give it a mention. Hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of all the decks that I want to play in Marvel Snap this season. Let me know if you guys think I'm right that Shuri and Thanos are still top doms. I think Electro and Sarah should be not too far behind. Galactus, I think, is going to be solid. Patriot could be a surprise. Silver Surfer could be a surprise. And yeah, hope you guys enjoy the video and check out some Storm decks. I think she might be a really good way of beating Shuri unless they start playing Captain Marvel and Vision. See you guys on the next one. Give it a like if you watch this far. And the keyword for today, if you watch this far, is Storm, because she might be the answer. Thanks, guys. Bye!